Hey guys, welcome back to Community Starcraft 2. I'm your host Magnet, and as we can see today, we're going to be talking about defending gateway attacks in Zerg versus Protoss. And by that we can mean like simple timings, really big all-ins from them, or just really quick hitters that are meant to catch you unaware and get you with your pants down not scouting. So we're going to be talking about ways to identify what's going on. We're going to kind of be teaching you how to think like a Protoss so that you can start to identify little keys that'll clue you into what's going on so that you can defend these attacks well. More importantly, we're also going to give you some good tips as far as things you should be doing anyway in this matchup to defend against stuff like this, even if you don't have full information. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the game. And the game we're going to be checking out first is Squirtle versus Sulky. Sulky's our red Zerg, obviously. Sulky's really good. He's kind of the de facto Zerg for just kind of reading your opponent and playing to beat them. So this should be interesting. So the first thing Sulky's going to do is he's just going to walk out here and drone scout. And this is going to get you a lot of information early on. It's going to identify whether there's Gateway first, Nexus first, Forage first, whatever, before your Overlord will. So this is a really good tactic here by Sulky. But we're not going to focus on that too much. We've already talked about scouting in this matchup, so there's no big reason to go back into detail about that. So he's just going to wait and see what the build is. Most of the time you're going to want to be double checking for a double gas, but that's not the case here. So Squirtle's coming in here, scouting around as well. From the Protoss perspective, this really signals nothing but an expansion right now, considering there's no gas being mined. Expansion should be coming down here in just a second. There we go. So Squirtle just doing a typical gateway expand. Sulky doing something intelligent, stealing the other gas here, being really annoying. This is also something that can benefit you from drone scouting, so look out for that option as well. This will basically force the Protoss into having to cut some corners and do some things he doesn't want to because he doesn't have enough gas. His Mothership Core will be late, which can offer you some advantages, but secondarily, it's going to really slow down his Warp Gate, considering the Cybernetics Core was so late. So Sulky just takes a quick third hatch. I'm going to talk about that just a little bit. Taking a quick third hatch seems really risky against a gateway expand, but honestly, if you just go third hatch, get your gas down right away and get Zergling speed on the way very soon, then you're going to be super safe from a lot of gateway attacks. This one especially is gimped because the Cybernetics Core is so late. This is almost like a minute late from where it could be. So be aware of little adjustments like this. If they take a Nexus before Cybernetics Core, then you know I have a little bit of time before I really need to get Zergling speed out. So this is a rare circumstance, a special situation where their Warp Gate is pretty late for a gateway expand. So you almost would treat this like the timing of a Forge expand and a gateway attack that's subsequently following. So throughout the game, you can sit your Overlords in here for just a little while. You need to find little perches like on top of this cliff, which I don't think is something I've talked about yet. So this little cliff right here will allow you a lot of information, and the Protoss can't see you until they have a flying unit, or until you move off the cliff, obviously. But throughout the game, you basically need to identify that a gateway attack is coming, and you need to keep Overlords hanging out, and be willing to sacrifice them just for information. But more importantly than not, I think this is something that Sulky's really missing out on, is getting this Zergling speed down. Another big tell here is the Twilight Council ever coming down. If the Twilight Council ever comes down before a third base, there's almost no reason for them not to do some type of gateway attack, and you can also start to look out for things like DTs. So even putting down emergency spores is good, and you can see the Zergling does come in here and verify that this is a Twilight Council. So yeah, I was just going to say you should see a gas immediately to start getting Zergling speed on the field, and that's exactly what we saw. So this is going to be Blink from Squirtle. So yes, I am putting Blink together with gateway attacks because the philosophy between defending both of those is pretty much the same. The first thing you need to look out for is right when their Warp Gate finishes, they may try to be aggressive, and if they're ever on 2 base for quite a long time as a Protoss, you shouldn't seek to make a ton of drones. If you try to saturate all 3 bases with drones, and they're still just on 2 bases and they're going to all-in you, then you will more than likely die most of the time, or lose the drones that you produced to the attack anyway. And even if you hold, you'll be down in drones nevertheless. So I would say a good drone count, if you're fighting in just a 2-base Protoss that doesn't ever take a third, is probably about 55. Any more than that is getting pretty risky. So get at the feel for what 55 drones feels like, and then don't start to exceed that until they start to show a third base. Even then, they could try to trick you and cancel the third, but either way, you should know the tempos, and most really fast third bases from Protoss will come up right now anyway, at about this 7-minute timing. So if you see a third base at about 7 minutes anyway, then you know you're free to drone for quite a little while. But not over-droning is the biggest key to not dying to these, and I see people all the time that are like, oh, I scouted everything perfectly and this and that and the other, but if you have 70 drones and no units when they attack you, then you shouldn't be expecting to hold that. So that's something you need to look out for as well. So Sulky should have Ling speed getting started here any second as soon as he starts mining gas. I don't know why he's not, to be totally honest, but the first little timing you need to be worried about is when Warp Gate finishes, and you need to understand the timings of Warp Gate depending on the type of opener. If it's a normal gateway expand where they go gate, core, and then nexus, their gateways, or rather their warp gate should finish up at about 6:10 roughly. Sometimes it's a little earlier if they chrono boost it really hard. So you should at least know that 6:10 is the first timing you need to be thinking about if there's something going on the map and you can position Zerglings, especially Zerglings in front of their base to catch them moving out is going to be a big deal. But overlords and stuff around the map, especially on these high perches, which you can see once again, there's a little perch right here that you can't see until he has the mothership core there. So he'll be able to see this pylon be coming down. So the 610 is basically the first timing you need to be worrying about. That's only on gateway expands. If it's on forge expands, and their gateways usually won't finish until maybe 7:20-ish, which is, like I said, this is about the time you would start thinking about it on a forge expand anyway, and that was just because Squirtle's Cybernetics core was so late. But nevertheless, you need to know what's going on the map. You need to know when he's moving out. So I can't overstress the importance of the Zerglings sitting outside the front of their base here, so that when they get attacked, you know, okay, he's out on the map. And if you have the control, you can kind of run them around and keep them alive to see where are they attacking from, so I can start to set up. Sulky has an idea this is going on. This is why he's moving his queens over here. But the fact that he has no Zergling speed is really bad. I don't know why he waited so long to get that. I think he might have just forgotten, honestly, because he made that gas a long time ago and then didn't start mining till right now. So another thing to be thinking about with these gateway timings is putting the Roach Warren down at just a really generic, safe time. About 6:30-ish is a good time, but if you open up with Zergling speed, you can afford to delay that just a little bit, because Zergling speed is just so strong, especially on creep. And especially against gateway-only units. The only real threat is like Zealots, but if you just have enough to get on top of the Stalkers and surround them, then the Zealots don't matter. I mean, you can kill them with Queens and Spines and maybe a few Roaches here and there because you can kite against them, so that shouldn't be a concern at that point. So we're going to see Squirtle start to set up here, and he's trying to attack before Blink finishes, so this is a several-stage gateway all-in that we're going to see from him. But Sulky needs to understand what's going on here, and he starts a spine. He has his queens in position right now. Doesn't want to get these caught, so that's kind of silly. But the Overlord also knows about what's going on, and he knows where the attack is approaching from. So all these are big factors to him being able to hold this. But if he had Zergling speed, he'd actually just crush this, and the fact that he doesn't is pretty sad. But even if you don't, you can see that you can still hold it. So keeping the queens alive is a priority here. You can throw away Zerglings for just a little while, but eventually you can't just keep continually throwing them away. He's trying to buy time for his spines. So you can see Squirtle's trying to set up right now, and this time warp won't be the same in the very near future. So by the time you're watching this video, most of you will actually see that this is a really long time warp, and time warp is no longer like that. So he can also identify, considering it was a Twilight Council, he did go ahead and fly his Overlord back in here. This is going to be Blink. And Blink is just a tad different from everything else. One thing that he's doing is he's saying if I live long enough, he won't have an observer for quite a while, considering most Blink attacks that just go straight into Blink don't carry observers. So if I can just get a good burrow and unburrow on top of him, kind of the way Jaedong did against Deer in the last BlizzCon, that'll be a way to deal with it. But mostly, just trying to wear him down with the right mix of Roaches and Zerglings is a good idea. And if you can ever get a full surround on your Zerglings, maybe with a flank from some armies up here or something, then that's a good idea as well. So we're going to see him continue to try to hold this. The high amount of queens is a big deal as well, something I haven't mentioned yet. But you want to have excess queens anyway for spreading creep, so you can start to recall the queens that are close to the hatchery, so you can keep doing this. One thing, okay, I feel like I'm overcomplicating this just a little bit, because one of the biggest ways to actually hold this is to not miss injects. So even though you have to continually fight this battle that's going on here, if you ever if you ever start to miss a lot of injects, then you're just going to be dead, because you won't have the production that you'll need when you have a lot of money sitting there, and dying with a lot of money in the bank is simply solved by spending your money. And you can't spend your money if you don't have larvae, so you definitely need to make sure that every once in a while, maybe when you're retreating from a battle, so like if you come in here and you fight a little bit and you realize you don't have enough and you walk back, then you should cycle through your hatcheries really fast and re-inject and then go back to the battle, because if you ever run out of units, then you're dead, obviously. So I probably should have mentioned that as the very first thing, but I guess I didn't. So the attack is continuing to build up here, and we can see that the forces from Sulky are starting to get fairly large. He's able to start getting roaches and zerglings out. Zergling speed's almost done, but if it was done a long time ago, he could have surrounded this and forced him to recall a long time ago anyway. So it's just being compounded by him not getting zergling speed. So more zealots are coming up here. You want to try to avoid the zealots as much as possible with your zerglings, with anything really. If you can get on top of the stalkers, they're what really matters in this. The zealots are just there to eat up some zergling damage. So keep everything away from the zealots as much as possible. Just try to kill the stalkers, because they're the long-lasting force in this push. So continuing to make units is Sulky here, and we can see that he's starting to get a little bit larva starved as well. He needs to be conscious of that, and secondarily, he does just make pretty much only roaches from this point if he has no larvae, so he should be okay, but that's something he really needs to be concerned about. His lack of injecting is really going to be causing him a lot of problems here. So I'm going to continue to see this coming up. We can see the blink is going off, and this is why getting a flank on this army would be so valuable, because they blink the hurt ones to the back, and if you had like 4 or 5 roaches back there, you could pick off 2 or 3 stalkers comfortably. So maybe even more than that. If you have zerglings, it's much, much better. So look out for extra attack points if you're getting in these types of fights. But the fact that Sulky's done pretty much everything he's supposed to means that he should hold this. It'll take a pretty big overcommitment from him, and you'll notice that throughout these battles he is walking back and forth with his units, and the only real units that he's losing in these fights are zerglings, so that his roach and queen count continues to grow throughout the fight. So that's one big key we're seeing that I haven't touched on yet. Try to dance your army back and forth, and if you can ever reinforce somewhere with spines and try to draw them into the spines, that's going to help you out a lot as well. So he's continuing to refill his units now, and you can see he's starting to get his money is starting to get a little bit high, but frankly he invested in that burrow a long time ago, so that if the stalkers ever walk on top of him, then they'll have a really hard time retreating from that point. So the burrow is another smart move that you can mix into this, since almost every gateway-based all-in will not have observers with it, so that's another good idea that you can employ. He does this on burrow right on top of the army, and at this point he can start to pick his targets so that he can target down the hurt stalkers if he wants to. Still having a little bit of a hard time, we can see here, but the longer you wait and the longer you can buy time with spines and the more roaches and queens and stuff you can build up, and the easier time you're going to have. You can see he does have to pull drones anyway, and he still might actually lose this base, so it looks like he's losing this, but at the same time it's equal economy, and all he needs is just one good fight in order to win this. So again, the lack of observer and the burrow tech here from Sulky is going to be a big deal in the remainder of these fights. You can see everything starting to rally up here once again. He's trying to bait him on top of the army, and now if you can unburrow behind him so that he has nowhere to blink to, then that's going to be really good for you. So we will see more of this going on. You can see even if he tries to blink, he blinks right into the army anyway, so this is going to be a good trade for Sulky. And now look at the supplies, 92 to 73. He can retake a hatchery, which he's doing over here right now, and all of a sudden this looks held, and for all intents and purposes it is. This does go on into a longer game, but I just want to focus on holding on this stage of the game so that you guys can get good information about that, because I know a lot of people do die to like gateway all-ins and stuff like that on the ladder. So that was a pretty good hold there from Sulky. Can't ever find these, so I just have to go back here and look at it. So let me take a look at another game from WCS. These are all from Season 1. This is Sue versus SOS, which is like lol at how similar their names are. I know the casters have a problem all the time with identifying who's who, but we will try our best to stay on top of who's who. Sue is really one of the best Zergs in the world, by the way. If you ever get a chance to watch Sue, do it. That's all. Whoops. So Sue's the yellow Zerg here, spawning on Daedalus Point, which is not really in the map pool anymore. That's one thing you need to consider as well, is if I'm Protoss, let's think about this from the Protoss perspective. If I'm Protoss, I'm going to take a second base, but my third base just sucks. Like, this is a huge open area that I can't really defend very well if I'm Protoss, and this is just not an option. It's way too far away, even though it is a decent choke. So you have to think, if the map really lends itself to 2-base all-ins, you should be preparing for some type of gateway all-in more often than not. So Su being extremely diligent, checking around his main base for proxies. That's craziness. You don't see that very often, but it obviously is very smart. Su's opting not to drone scout here. Instead, he's just using his Overlord to figure out what's going on. And SOS opens up with a Forge. So this means that the gateway timings, right away, you should say gateway timings are a little bit after 7 minutes at their absolute earliest. So that's when I should start being aware that attacks can start building up from that point. But the fact that he sees it's a Forge lets him know that he can start to prepare against things like Cannon Rush, which SOS is definitely known for doing fairly often. So you'll have to prepare for stuff like that. And like we've talked about in the scouting video, keep your Overlord over the natural, because you need to be able to see this stuff come down if it starts to happen. But we're not going to see that in this game, because Gateway's on the way as well, and the Nexus. It was a Nexus first here from SOS. But still, we need to get into the point where it is a Gateway attack. So, like we said, we can basically fast forward and just watch the clock up until a little bit after 7 minutes is when the first warp gates, or rather warp ins, should be ready to go. So fast forward here and just wait for that to come up. You can see Su. Now, we should talk about the gas a little bit against the Forge Expand. It's not overly needed to get Zergling Speed right away, but Zergling Speed is never bad. So Su just goes ahead and grabs Zergling Speed anyway, takes the third base fairly early as well. The latest your third base should really go down is probably like 5 minutes. The earlier, honestly, the better, because the better creep you're going to have, the better information you're going to have, better production you're going to have. It's very rare that you ever need to take a later third base. So some gateways coming up here, and if his Overlord can see this, that's going to be a dead giveaway that it's going to be some sort of gateway-based timing. But either way, we're watching the clock here. It's a little bit after 7 minutes, and it's not done yet for SOS at 7 minutes because he didn't dump all of his Chrono Boost into there like he could have. If you do nothing but dump Chrono Boost into this off of some type of Forge opener, a little bit after 7 minutes is when it'll finish. He could have done it faster, but this is what's coming up nevertheless. So Mothership Core rallying out here, and there is a Nexus on the way. So this is interesting. Sometimes you're going to see 3-base stuff, or sometimes they'll just take a Nexus to try and freak you out. So let's take a look at Su's drone count. 55, which is about exactly where we would say not to exceed if you're expecting some sort of gateway timing. Right now he needs to verify that there's a third base, and then he can increase his drone count. But sometimes these can still be some quick hitters that they can use with a lot of sentries and try to catch you teching, so be aware of that. Su, in the meantime, he's saying, screw the Roach Warren, I went really fast Hive, and I'm just going to do a Hydralisk Den instead. And this is cutting a little bit of corners. You're going to be a little softer against earlier gateway attacks, but at the same time, he did research Zergling Speed, so he should be fine against that. He should have at least one extra queen out here to start spreading creep. I don't even know if he does, actually. No, only 3. So if you got a couple of extra queens and he had Zergling Speed and this was just a quick hitter with maybe 6 gateways or something, he would be okay with the Zergling Speed and the queens. But the Hydralisk Den is going to prolong out the viability of his defense against gateway attacks, considering Hydralisks are so good against every type of gateway unit. So now he sees that there's a third base. You can see him adding on drones right now to get up to the ideal drone count. If you see a third base, you can also just go ahead and take a fourth fairly early as well. So we'll see if Su decides to do that. This has been a while since I've seen these games, so this is somewhat authentic to my first reactions. I think I categorize all these replays as fast as I can to get the information out. And this is what you're going to see off of 3-base sometimes. This is going to be a really fast 3-base blink. And this is something that Protoss likes to do because it has the strength of a 2-base blink at maybe a minute later with really a lot stronger warp ends. So that's kind of the idea behind this. But Hydra Ling is perfect against blink all-ins. It should smash pretty much any of them unless you get terrible engagements or you get supply blocked or missed drones or something throughout the game, which, of course, we've already talked about that in macro videos. So you can go back and watch those if you need more help on that. So he sees the first little stage of this coming out, and just because this is a blink timing on 3-base doesn't mean that they're going to wait for blink to finish. They might push out before then, which is why having information on the map and knowing where your opponent is coming from and what's in his composition is a big deal. So if he took a 4th base, it might be a little bit under siege right now, but still, the fact that he has Zergling speed out and the fact that he has Hydralisks on the way is going to put him in a good position. And one of the bigger upgrades defending against Gateway timings is this Hydra range. You definitely don't want to be pushed out by force fields as hard, which is what the first stage is usually going to consist of. So getting Hydra range is a pretty big deal, and pushing your creep out a little further is a big deal as well, but Sue's being a little bit lazy about that. I think because he didn't make those extra queens, it's going to be pretty hard for him to push his creep that fast. So making spines, getting the Hydralis out, getting Zergling speed out, going to all bode very well for him. So going to see the engagement here. One thing I should mention here in just a little bit is that if you can ever deny these forward pylons with little packs of Zerglings or something, then that's always really profitable. So now look at this map. He has to burn so many force fields just to block this off. This is like 8 force fields at least to block this off and keep his army safe. And that's why you always want to try to engage in an open area if you can help it. But this is why this map was so good for Zerg back when it was in circulation. So try to get him pitted into big open areas, so he has to waste a lot of force fields to prevent you from getting a good surround. But the longer you can wait, the better production you're going to have, the easier time you're going to have with this as well. You can see him trying to shark around and kill pylons with the Zerglings, so that's one thing that he can do. And maybe try and force the army back for just a little bit. All he lost was just a few Zerglings there, he wasted a couple force fields. So Sue's just buying time here and waiting for enough units to get built up to the point where he can just smash this attack. And that's definitely what you want to do against these type of things, because they get stronger the longer they're on the map. Some more Warpins coming in here. Sue is trying to flank with this second pair of Zerglings whenever he's ready to go. And like I said, surface area is huge, especially if you can get them from behind. And especially against Blink, because they'll just be blinking right back into units, rather than blinking to safety, which is what they want to do. So Sue continuing to just master pulling this army around and delaying as much as he can with just a few Zerglings. He's not spending a lot doing this. He's even squeezing in drones while this is going on because he's able to push SOS back to his side of the map. So you need to be understanding at least of everything that's going on when you watch pros do stuff like this. He's continuing to follow up Scout here. He should know that it's Blink right now, and that Blink is the follow-up. Considering he's seeing Blink before any other tech. There's no Robo, there's no Stargate, there's nothing like that. And he should be on top of what's going on here. So now his forces are starting to assemble. He should have Hydra speed in just a second, which means he can start to fight more off creep. And then from this point, I mean, it's really just up to the Protoss to get back over there and make something happen, because the longer they sit there and the more they make Stalkers, the worse position they're going to be on without Splash as the game goes on. So we should see this come to a head here in just a second. I'll just fast forward until that point. You can see Sue still being really diligent. He's saying, you know what, the most probes that Protoss can have is about 75, so I'm going to stay somewhere kind of near that a little bit so that I don't overmake drones and die to him moving across the map. So this is a kind of a tense situation. You'll get into this every once in a while. But, yeah, we'll see this come together here in just a second. So stuff pushing across the map here. He blinks forward to try and prevent his pylon from being taken down. Hydras and Lings all out on the map right now. He's getting a good spread so that once this fight happens, this really should be easy peasy for Sue, considering he has such good tech that basically directly counters what the Protoss has. Again, just trying to posture in here, maybe trying to make him waste force fields, make him lose a couple units if he's being sloppy or something. All different things that he needs to be trying to do to try and peel this apart. But as this approaches, man, this is really taking forever. Okay, this should be it. I mean, looking at the game timer, nothing else really makes sense. Now that he has good surface area, he's just going to say, alright, it's time to go. And even if you get force fielded like this, you need to be willing to try and find other ways around the force field. This is why he's getting on the high ground here. He's not letting too many of his units just sit back here. So the micro in this situation is that if you ever have stuff caught behind force fields, if you're committed to this for whatever reason, you can try and pull these units to the side and get them over here and firing, but then you don't want to alienate these units as well. So there's some situations where you just need to pull back and wait for him to re-engage, considering he's going to run out of force fields eventually. But there's some situations where you can just keep going and try to go around the force fields and surround him, but you don't want to leave half your army on an island and get them trapped somewhere that they don't want to be. So this is continuing to go on here. And this has basically been held. I mean, Sue didn't lose that much, and SOS has no splash. If you ever get maxed out against a situation like this is when you just need to start trading and saying, you know what, I can just put pressure on you all day, and there's nothing you can do because you're so over-invested in these gateway units that by the time I get a huge enough army, you just won't be able to kill my army fast enough, and I should win. So you see Sue doing that just a little bit. You can see him start to spread out. And then he should just walk over there and kill him eventually because he just has so much stuff. So as soon as we get there, yeah, he's just spreading out. As you can see right now, any sort of surface area advantage you can have on your opponent is going to be enormous to getting an advantage in these battles. And like I said, because he was able to tech so well and because he was able to hold off any different type of stage or attempt at an attack from a gateway all-in, he just crushes this army. There's no splash because there's no storm, no anything. And on these earlier gateway attacks, their splash is going to be really late, so you need to be aware of that, and Sue runs over SOS quite effortlessly. I've got one more that's a little different than the previous ones, so I guess we've looked at so far two types of blink all-ins. One's strictly 2-base, one's more of a macro play, and the third one is going to be a lot faster hitting one. I don't know, I'm just sitting here. So we will we'll take a look at that, and this is going to be Life once again, as we saw him in the last video in this playlist, which was a scouting video. He's going to be fighting Yonghua, and Yonghua does a lot of gateway stuff. He's one of the better gateway players, kind of along the veins of Huck and Stork. But we will see what comes down in this one. So Life, of course, you always want to send out your first Overlord to figure out what's going on. This is a 2-player map, so you can just send it straight to the natural and figure out what the buildings are. Yonghua looks like he wants to gateway expand, so this won't be a forge like last time, so we're going to have to consider different timings. And blocking the hatchery is very annoying, but we'll eventually get that down, taken care of. So like we were talking about, if it's just gateway first, straight into cybernetics core and no nexus between there, the gateway timings you're going to look out for is about 6:10, and that's going to be more so what we're going to see this game is a faster gateway attack, so that you can see those timings being executed properly. And anytime, okay, so we just barely saw the nexus and then the core right afterwards, so this should signal to Life that the timing for warp gate has been delayed by about a minute. A little bit after 7 minutes is when he's going to have to start to worry, rather than 6. So you don't really see those faster 6-minute timings terribly often, considering Protoss has such few units to work with, but it can still happen every once in a while. At least being aware of the timings is going to be a big battle, or rather a big win to the overall battle. Of course you could come up here and double check nothing's weird going on, but yeah, he knows. So, Life just getting on his 3 bases as soon as possible, like we were talking about before. As soon as your 3rd base is down, honestly, this is something you don't see from pros too terribly often, but this is something that I want you guys to consider, is that once you get your 3rd base planted, you want to think about taking a gas right away and getting that Zergling speed, because it is so useful at holding off attacks. Speed Zerglings are like 10 times better than Slowlings. You'll get so many better engagements because you have speed on your Zerglings, that just getting this gas right after your 3rd hatchery is almost always worth it. And eventually we'll be taking a look at some builds from TLO who does that every game, and it's just so useful. I would really consider that in your own games. It'll be especially helpful in holding off these gateway attacks. So this time is a little different. This is going to be a Stargate here from Yonghua, and this is going to be more of like a Phoenix Zealot type of play. And behind that, there's also a Twilight Council, so this is something that Life needs to be aware of as well. We can see it coming down here right now. And even if Life doesn't know about this, which I'm pretty sure he actually misses this information because it's in such a weird spot in the base, even because of that, you need to be aware of the little different transitions that can come up after this. So on the map, there are some Zerglings just checking out here. He does have a Zergling, or at least he did have a Zergling out in front, just to double check when the army is coming across. He does have the watchtowers here. You can see the time has passed for that initial warp gate timing. You can see warp gate is just finishing up, and there's really nothing on the map right now, and he does see Phoenix, but he can't afford to let his guard down. So he's being diligent, putting up the Roach Warren just for safety. He does have spores to protect against the Phoenixes, but he does need to be willing at any time to stop making drones and stay at a reasonable drone count. You can see he's at 63. It's actually pretty high for any sort of 2-base stuff, but it's okay against more Stargate-based things. This is actually just going to be a fake Stargate play right into Blink. And Life needs to be on top of this and definitely consider this possibility, rather than just being like, oh, pff, it's Stargate, he's just going to take it third and I'll just do whatever and not pay attention to it. But in fact, this is a well-disguised Phoenix play because it's going to follow up straight into an all-in from Yanghua. So Life needs to be aware of stuff like that, and this is why making only a certain amount of drones and not going crazy with them, not taking like a fourth base right away is a big way to hold these. Just accept your minor economic lead and trade well against his army whenever it comes out. And of course, keep an eye on his third base area to see when that third base is taken or if it's taken at all. And because he saw units moving out here with the Zergling that just died, now he knows what's up. Now he knows this is an all-in, and because he has speed, basically going to be done by the time it gets there, and enough lings, and eventually he'll have 1-1, which can run over this army, then he should be okay. So we'll watch him continue to deal with this. Like I said, extra queens are always a good idea, but you do need to stay on top of your injects during this timing as well, because if you mess up your injects, or if you get supply block because you don't have an overlord out, then all of a sudden you're dead because you can't afford any units. So, like we were talking about before, one of the best ways to get rid of attacks like this is just to get on top of them before they even get their first warp-in out on the map. So you can see his armies here. There's some stuff rallying up right here because he didn't have a forward pylon quite yet. But if he can surround it with his Zerglings right now, then this basically forces him to recall or just take a terrible trade. So he's going to run up here, and he could have been a little more aggressive about getting that taken down, but he didn't know where the reinforcements were, so that was kind of a little bit of a misplay from Life, but still, he doesn't know everything. And again, if you can just buy enough time for spine crawlers to finish, then you should be just fine. So, creep spread is also a big deal, because now he knows the army's circumventing where the spines and spores are, so he can move everything over there. So he should know now, and he starts to move over. Definitely don't want to lose position and get a position where you really can't engage. And because there's so many Zerglings here, since there's only Stalkers and really no Zealots to buffer, this will be pretty good trades here for Life for just a little while. But he needs to continue to refill on units. You can see more stuff coming in here. The spines are almost done, and you can relocate these spines when as need be. He also needs to connect his creep, which he's doing right now. So from this point on, it's really just about making units and choosing the right times to fight. The Zealots being in the back here are pretty funny because they're not doing anything. But from this point, we may see one little micro trick here from Life, and that is just focusing on the Stalkers and kind of ignoring the Zealots for the most part. Or rather, kind of trying to avoid the Zealots anyway, but we may see that come up here in just a little bit. So you can see now he's on top of the Stalkers. Stalkers have a really hard time dealing with this, and Life, you can't overcommit too hard, because eventually you're going to still be taking damage from Stalkers that aren't quite dead yet. So just be patient, go back, relocate if you need to, which Yanghua is moving away from those spines, which is a smart choice from him, but Life is already on top of it. Probably don't want to put the weakened spine out in front, but that's okay. So roaches and stuff start coming up here once again, and once he gets his Zerglings to buffer is when he's going to go. He's not just going to go with only the roaches and queens. He needs something there to eat some damage, because the roaches and queens are his long-term units that are going to help him out for a long time. So now this is starting to develop once again, and if you're Life, you can start thinking about taking out these extra pylons with just a few Zerglings, and maybe even trying to get a flank, so that if you're back here and he's blinking back, he's just blinking right back into more damage, and that's not doing him any good. So, Life will eventually hold this in the next couple of minutes, so we'll just go ahead and continue to watch. You can see the blinks are starting to become a big deal, but once you get them low enough, you can start to try and pick off Stalkers individually. And like I said, it can look bad every once in a while, Life attacking his own hatchery. It can look bad every once in a while if you have to kind of go back and regroup, but keeping the units flowing out of these hatcheries is, of course, always the biggest deal in holding these off. So, Life now has spines at 2 locations, so he should be totally fine. Or rather, it doesn't rely on him to move around to try and deal with that. But eventually, the drone lead, because he's able to survive for long enough, the drone lead and the economic lead is going to result in more units, and he'll eventually be able to push this away. I'm just going to play this on fast forward here really quickly, probably for the rest of the game. Videos have gone on for a little while, but... So yeah, we're seeing lots of blink micro come down, but by the time Yanghua is this far down on units and Life can start to get in there and get Zerglings on top of Stalkers, then he should be fine. This is another cool little trick that he did, is that when Yanghua blinked in, Life just turned around and said, okay, now you have no options for retreating other than walking away, so I can start to target down the weaker Stalkers here, the ones that are in the red, and get rid of those and start to be able to push this off a little bit better. Another aggressive blink in from Yanghua, but Life This is the perfect example of the only reason he's holding this is because he's able to continue injecting, he's able to continue producing units throughout all this. If he ever had a round where he didn't inject and he got larva blocked and a lot of money, then he'd be dead right away. So this is the perfect game just to show you that really making units is the biggest deal. And eventually, there'll eventually become a point where the Protoss breaks and they can't keep doing this, and this is that time here from life. He's just running him over right now. Young has clearly given up, and this will basically end the game. So I hope that was helpful for you guys. I hope that we can get a lot more videos that are like this, that are basically breaking down specific game situations, so that if you're ever having a problem with something, ideally you can come to here and say, what am I supposed to do about this? And there should ideally be a video for it already. So look out for more of those in the future. In the meantime, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later.